Hello, this is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. The world's religions do not take a favorable stance on the practice of money lending. It was Jesus who directly opposed the moneylenders and overturned the money changers' tables. It was the one time he lost his cool, and for good reason. Because he understood the scheme. Bait people with material goods that they cannot afford, things like jewelry and fine art, and then offer them loans that will enslave them in perpetuity. That is the scheme that has been used since the dawn of man. Muhammad had the same opinion, as Muhammad also understood that money lending is used to enslave people. 50 years ago, our country was not run on lending. 50 years ago, loans were not being offered for the most rudimentary items. There were no credit cards. There was no such thing as a payday lender. You could not finance a sofa or other small ticket items with financing. But today we are run on debt, and the question is why? Our country is run on a debt-based currency system, which means that every unit of currency, every dollar, is not simply an instrument of exchange, but rather it is also an instrument of enslavement, debt enslavement. Conducting exchange is a necessity of life, just like breathing. And so the money lenders understood this, and they charge you for this simple action and drive you into a modern form of enslavement. At the same time, your county officials, the county officials of Fort Bend County and Harris County, they understand this concept, and they regularly use it against you. While our economy is in a state of havoc with record-setting gas prices, hyperinflation, which we have not seen in decades, interest rate hikes that have never been happened to this extent in the history of our country, while our elderly can barely make their mortgage payments, Fort Bend County officials passed a record-setting bond placing one more weight on the backs of the people of Fort Bend County. In decades past, governments ran on their regular operating budget, but now through a constant pressing of the issue, this idea has become forgotten. It's become forgotten to the everyday citizen. The idea that a local governments can make its ends meet just through its yearly operating budget is something that is not even considered in today's county commissioner's court. Now, rather, they have one reason after another why that simply cannot happen, and they have to press you, the taxpayer, for the regular taxes plus an additional tax on top of it. So my question for you is, was Muhammad right when he took an active stance against the practice of money lending? Was Jesus right when he gave the moneylenders a piece of his mind? This is the question of the day, because it is the lending system that is used to enslave mankind, and does this practice extend from the biggest banks that set the foundations of the world's economies right down to the local governments of Fort Bend and Harris County? Are your local county officials actively enslaving their constituents? This is the question of our time. And this is the Chris Heasley Show. And on this show, we will give you all of the ideas, the content, the information that you need to take back your city, your county, your state, the great state of Texas, and your country. But the obligation is on you. The obligation is on you to get involved, to take an active stance in your county affairs, to begin attending county commissioner's court, to begin attending your school board meetings, to begin attending your city councils, and to begin calling your local representatives and giving them your opinion on the things that matter to you. And on today's show, we have two very interesting guests. We have Bill Rickert, County Treasurer for Fort Bend County. How are you doing today, Bill?
All right, great to be here.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to it.
Good deal. Lana Centonze, who's running for, which congressional district are you running for, Lana?
Congressional District 18. I'm running against Sylvester Turner.
Excellent, very good. And then we should have a caller, Nicholas Sire. Nicholas, are you on the line?
I am.
Excellent, very good. Nicholas is a CPA, and he is very well informed on the bond issue that recently passed in Fort Bend County, so we're looking forward to his opinion. But I want to hand it off to you, Bill. Tell me what you think about what I just had to say. What do you think about the use of debt in county operations? Is it legitimate? Give me your opinion.
Well, first of all, I think, in everything in life, whether it's your personal finances or it's a business finances, there has to be some measurement of why you're borrowing money, right? I mean, you have to have a good understanding of what the ultimate goal is and the risk versus reward. When we look at county government specifically, there's certain projects where borrowing money, which is a bond, basically is borrowing money to do these projects because the life of the project, as far as the lifetime of a road or the lifetime or whatever, the people that live there today may not live there tomorrow, and they would be paying for all today costs that in taxes that someone else won't have to pay for in the future, right? That may move there or population's constantly changing and growing here in Fort Bend County. So, the objective, just like a business, when it borrows money to buy equipment for manufacturing and depreciates that equipment over time, it's to map that against the revenue. The same thing is, you're doing these projects and that revenue is your tax base coming in over time. And as long as you're doing the right projects, the right scale, at the right for the right lifetime and for the right reasons, bonds are okay. The challenge we have is that it's become a business, right? Of okay, let's do these mega bonds so that when any resident looks in there, as far as the content, there's something that's a gain for them to get them to vote for it. And then the bigger that pot is, it's like a pot of gold. For the contractors, they're going to get awarded these contracts to the engineering firms, construction, and all that. So then it allows these elected officials that are making these decisions to raise more campaign funds. So it's a vicious circle there that we've gotten ourselves into. And I'm a firm believer that we should be, not issuing voting on bonds at a magnitude that we know we can't execute the work over a reasonable period of time, and that the content is not things that are part of the core objectives of county government and are going to last the lifetime that supports the financing.
So I think you presented a comprehensive argument. I'm going to pull one little item out of it. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a resident and I'm looking to locate into a new county, am I going to look at a county that's ridden with debt, or am I going to look at a debt-free county? It's fairly clear that when these metropolitan areas begin all debt-based programs grow. I've never seen one that doesn't grow. They start in inches and they grow into larger meters, lengths, and so what happens is that the country areas become more opportune for new families to move into. And as a result, we begin the deterioration of our beautiful cities. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, part of the challenge is, just like I'll go back to a business, right? I come from the corporate world, is you have to look at your competitors, right? I mean, if you're not looking at what your surrounding counties are doing and what their debt burden is and what their tax rate is, and it's going to be not always one for one, because we are a growing metropolitan county, and if you're going to be in Austin County, two counties, or actually they touch our county, it's going to be a lot cheaper because they're not having to support as much infrastructure and they're not going to have as many big projects. You're absolutely right about that. The one thing I think we're lacking here in Fort Bend County that puts the burden on our residents is the lack of large industrial or larger manufacturing, those type of things that would offset the burden to residential taxpayers, right? So we have to foot the bill. We're basically a bedroom community that's the size of a large city, right, in Fort Bend County here. So, we have people in homes paying for all the infrastructure, right, versus having enough of other type of tax revenue to offset that.
So, Lana, I know you're running at the national level, but do you have an opinion on how debt at the local level is sort of is sort of contributing to the decline of our local cities, our local areas?
So I believe that if you're gonna have these bonds that's gonna take millions and millions and millions of dollars, and you're stretching it out, let's say for 8 years, it's unfair to the people, the constituents, the citizens of that county to pay such a huge hefty price. As our guest said, they may be there for a year or two, but yet still they're paying all this money, and you're adding in all these extra things that really doesn't even count. That's unfair. I think we need to limit it to the amount of time that the person is going to be within that, let's say it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Let's limit it to that 4 years, and use that money and don't continue to spend. As Americans, we are spending, spending, spending. Our government just loves to spend, and it's time to limit that spending.
So the thing I'm hearing from both of you is that we need strict limitations, that if we're going to do these bonds, which I'll hold my arguments on that in a minute, but if we're going to do these, there needs to be strict limitations on it. But Fort Bend County blew the barn doors off the barn, okay? So Fort Bend County passed, 7, 8, 9 years of worth of spending in one vote. And what that does is that allows them to not have to go, they should have to come to the citizens every year, maybe every 2 years, and ask for the permission for any additional funds. And they didn't do that. They were able to get this thing pulled off where they get 7, 8, 9 years of spending in one vote. And then they don't need the citizens anymore. Bye, you can go away. We don't need you. We're going to go talk to the engineering firms and all the other local companies bidding on us who are going to contribute to our campaigns. Bill, you want to talk about can you speak specifically on the Fort Bend County bond that recently passed?
Yeah. So first of all, in my opinion, there's just way too many items, right? I would like to see, a bond for each large ticket item, right? Where you can vote as a resident, say, I want this, I don't want this, right? This is like an omnibus bill, right? It's all inclusive. It's got, everything you can imagine. The only things that are separated out are the things that have to be separated out by law, like the park stuff. So, so we ended up with 2 bonds to vote on, and, nobody really knows if anybody that looks finds something for themselves in there, and if they don't look, they assume people smarter than them decided we need this, right? So there's a whole education process. While the county and elected officials are barred from promoting for or against a bond, but just promoting that there is a bond is promoting for the bond, right? And it's I think there's not enough money spent and effort to educate people as to what this does to you, right? I mean, if you look at our budget going into this year, the new budget, we have nearly $15 million more in the budget to pay for bonds, right? It's increased for debt service, right? And not to mention the things we're doing outside of bonds, right? With these public-private partnerships, like the epicenter, the new law enforcement training center, the new IT building. All these things are being, in my opinion, should have been bond projects individually on the ballot, so that people could decide whether we do these things or not. And no vote, nothing. We are, and I look at it in terms of, everybody talks about the county's debt, with bonds. I look at it as our county's obligations, right? As we walk into these obligations, we're committing the residents of Fort Bend County to pay for this stuff for long term. And in combination with that, we have been on a spending spree of buying up things, right? We buy up this property here. We buy up a defunct gym over here. Going to make a community center. Everything we buy as a county or a government of any government entity that is owned by individuals or corporations, we're taking those things off the tax rolls, right? And we take those off the tax rolls, we're increasing the burden because government doesn't pay taxes, so we increase the burden on all our taxpayers. And I'll use an example that just occurred with the in Pecan Grove, they had the golf club there with the golf course, and the local mud bought the golf course. Well, what that does is, now that mud no longer receives taxes from that facility, so that causes an impact on all their residents. But everybody in Fort Bend County is funding it because they no longer pay Fort Bend County taxes either, right? So, as land, there's airport, there's all these different buildings and projects where we're actually removing items from the tax roll that add a burden to the taxpayers.
So I just want to Bill just presented such a critique of this bond that it's too much information. It's that complicated. But there's one stat that he pulled out of there that every county resident should hear. $15 million in debt service so the county commissioners can have their Christmas day, under the Christmas tree getting their presents. That's how I envision it.
Yeah, and
they're handing out gifts to everybody. They're getting campaign contributions, and you, the citizen, are paying $15 million in debt service, and they're going to spend all that money. It's supposed to last 7 or 8 years. It's going to be gone. What do you think, Bill? 3 or 4 years?
That's $15 million additional for debt service, and that's based on what bonds are being issued, during the course of the year, and we have to pay for, right? It's not the total bond burden, right? So it's as it's being issued, that's what we have to pay to service those bonds. And it's it gets scary when you look at it and you watch where this is going, in addition to the other commitments that are going on within the county. And we had elected officials and others stand in these town halls when they were going around talking about these bonds, saying this does not raise your taxes. Well, no, it doesn't directly. Because you pass this doesn't mean your taxes go up. But in order to service that $15 million in extra payments, right, that it causes the tax rate to have to be, there's some part of the tax rate related to that, right? So, you can't say that it doesn't raise your taxes. Just like you can't say, well, I didn't raise your taxes because we lowered the tax rate. Well, what is the total revenue coming into the county? I mean, we're looking at a budget of $734 million coming into this year. That's an increase of $55 million, right, in that budget. So you could say $15 million is that additional debt service, right, of the $55 million we're increasing.
So, Lana, we're talking about Fort Bend County a lot, but you're going to be a national representative. Mm-hmm. How do you see this happening over in Harris County? How do you see it affecting the entire area that you will be representing?
So what I'm hearing from our guest is that there is a huge lack of integrity. And there is lack of integrity, whether it be Fort Bend or Harris County. And people need to be held responsible for that integrity. And if you're passing a bond, my thoughts are that bond should be broken up into segments. So when the people go to vote, they can say, okay, I want this, but I don't want that. And whatever the citizen says is what should go. But there's such a huge lack of integrity, and someone needs to be held responsible.
Right. So I met Nicholas at a town hall event, and he is well studied on the Fort Bend County bond that Bill has been discussing for some time. So Nicholas, I'm going to ask you, tell me what your observations are on that bond. What was it that caused you and again, you're not an elected official, you're simply a county resident who's doing his part to take a stake in local affairs. What was it that caused you to take to study this issue and get out there and talk about it a little bit?
Sure. Chris, thanks for having me on your show. As Chris mentioned, I am a registered CPA in the state of Texas, and I just want to be clear for the listeners that I'm calling in as a resident of Fort Bend County. I'm not here to provide any professional advice or opinions. But really what I've come across is seeing all these public notices on social media and in newspapers. I've come to realize that the two recent bonds, there was a Peace Mobility bond, which was Part A, which was about $713 million, and then there was a Part B, which was a Parks bond for $153 million. When you add those up, you get close to $1 billion. And my friend said, you know how much $1 billion is if you spend $1 a second? And I said, no, not off the top of my head. And I did some research. And when you spend $1 a second and you're dealing with $1 million, that's approximately 11 days. When you talk about $1 billion, that's about 31.5 years, which is an astronomical number in my mind. Mm-hmm. And as I started doing some research and finding out about where this bond was coming from, there were other local groups that started to share information with the registered voters. They came across the Taxpayers Coalition. They published some literature, and I believe they pushed for some of the public bond meetings to take place. Really, the $713 million for the Part A mobility is about 15 years of future spending, and it's equal to all the mobility bonds ever passed in the county. And it's consisting of about 97 projects at $7.3 million apiece. And then you have the parks piece, and you start looking at that, and you realize that they're trying to allocate $4 million for a dog park. They're trying to install cricket fields, and you start asking yourself questions about how were these projects selected, and who's going to pay for these. And I did research with some friends, and a Houston Landing back in October of 23 disclosed a newspaper article about each of the 4 county commissioners who were boots on the ground for the project. They talked with constituents, community groups, homeowners associations, and boards about the needs in the community. And I polled my social media network, and I said, have you heard of any of these meetings with the HOAs or the MUDs? And the simple answer was crickets. And then I started looking a little bit more at, well, why are we looking at cricket fields in Fort Bend County? Well, for those that didn't know, I did a little bit of homework, and the Houston Chronicle and other websites talked about how there was going to be FIFA World Cup heading to Houston in 2026. And then NPR talked about the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics, and they were looking at Fort Bend County being a hub for some of these cricket fields, where they were spending about $2.9 million in Missouri City for a cricket field. I don't know where they were going to place that field. I have my suspicions that it's going to be State Mo Park, but it became more complicated as I started doing some homework.
Excellent.
Yeah. I'm jump in if you don't mind.
Please go.
One of the things I think where we've gone wrong is we forget what the purpose of county government is. And our core things, right? So mobility is a core thing, and the safety of our residents is another core thing, and in our case, drainage, right, is a very important issue. All of those we need. We made some big steps in this past year with increasing pay for law enforcement, but obviously we're having trouble hiring. Part of that is external factors with the treatment of law enforcement and those type things. But we need to be focusing on those things. Parks are nice, monuments are nice, all those things, but they're not necessities. And if we look at it from a parks perspective, I personally would have no problem with the county taking the lead on acquiring lands to preserve for parklands in the future, right? For when they get annexed by a city or some other entity wants to develop the park. But for us to be in the parks business while we're having trouble staffing our sheriff's office, while we're having trouble with flood mitigation, and I look at our budget this year, the drainage part of our budget is down 1.6 million. How in the world can we be reducing that budget when that's one of the core things for the safety and our residents in Fort Bend County? So things just don't. It's like there's pet projects that get priorities, and the expansion of government. Like I mentioned earlier, buying facilities, buying a theater here, buying a church there, buying, and getting into the business of servicing residents at a level that we should depend on our nonprofits for, right? I worked for an international company in the oil industry, and I saw what government expansion does in Europe, where you basically drive nonprofits out of business. And you depend on a bureaucracy of government to take care of your residents from a social perspective, and it just doesn't work as well as it does when you have a nonprofit who has to go out there and beg and show what they're doing to get money. And I have no problem with if government wants to help fund a nonprofit for a specific area where there's a weakness and we want to go. But for us to get in the business and expand execution on those items as county government, I don't think that's the best way to do it.
I think, there's one other argument. It overcomplicates government. So they have such expansive plans for moving county operations in so many different ways that it boggles the mind, and it makes it so that the average citizen can no longer ascertain how to critique their government, how to evaluate their government. Government, I'm hesitant to say they should be doing parks, because if I say they should be doing parks, I want them to do parks. But they're going to take that and they're going to run down the court and they're going to blow that one statement out, and they're going to do everything under the sun because we want a baseball park here and there, right? So what I'm trying to say is that they overcomplicate government, and they do it for a reason, so that when you show up at county commissioner's court, you don't even know where to start asking the questions. This conversation here is an incredible critique of county government. And at the same time, it's a very high-level conversation because government is so complicated. Nicholas, you told me about something. I don't know if you're versed in this, but you mentioned on the phone something about a city in Louisiana. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So there was give me one moment here. Let me bring it up.
Hey, man, we'll give you a second. Lana, jump in here. Tell me what you're thinking. Harris County the Astrodome was 10 years defunct, and they still had a multi-million-dollar budget to pay down on Harris County's Astrodome, right? We all love the Astrodome, but I don't want any more Astrodomes. I don't want any more big-ticket items. Concert halls, arenas. One of the things is that when they build these sports stadiums for these athletes, that allows these sports leagues to offer these multi-million-dollar contracts, $30 million for a football player, because we're funding their Astrodomes, and they're putting us into debt. When I drove here, the homeless encampments I drove by are heartbreaking, and it's done because governments are constantly putting more weight and pressure on the back of the people, and the final straw that breaks the camel's back happens, and then we can't even. Our elderly can't pay for their housing, and they go into very desperate situations. But I'm going way out here on this, but what I'm trying to say is that, is it not time to pull the reins in on these county officials?
So, we are majoring in the minors, right? And the thing is that we have to focus on what the citizens need. Citizens need no more crime, right? We've got to have more police officers out there. We need to have the community and the police officers connecting. Infrastructure. These are things that I'm running on. We've got to really build up our infrastructure. And our economy stinks. I've never seen so many elderly who have come out of retirement just to make ends meet. They're going back to work, not because they're bored, but because they can't make ends meet. We've got to make changes, and unless we make these changes, our economy and our lifestyle is going to just deteriorate, and it's already happening. So we've got to make changes, and we've got to stop majoring in the minors and major in the major.
And I'm going to make an assumption here. You're an immigrant.
I am.
And you probably came here because of the opportunity in this great land.
Absolutely.
Do you not see it withering away?
Absolutely. And this is the main reason why I'm running. I came here as an immigrant. I was only 6 years old. Of course, I didn't really know much about America, but as I grew up, I realized that this country has done so much for my family. I wanted to give back. I've worked for the federal government for many years and saw how our government is so broken. And I took the step to really step out and make a difference. And it's time to make a difference. As an immigrant, I grew up. I saw how much America has done, but now it's not that way anymore. And I'm fighting for my children and your children and our grandchildren. They need to have something that they can fall back on. And right now, that's not happening.
So, Nicholas, did you find that article?
I did, and I didn't want to misspeak about it, but it had to do with the state of Louisiana. Near Baton Rouge, there was about 100,000 people that went to the state Supreme Court where they wanted to essentially de-annex from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to create a new city called St. George. And they described it as a culmination of citizens exercising their constitutional right with the state Supreme Court. And they said they just kind of described it as a new way of life and coming together and really holding government accountable in a way that's best for the citizens, because they kind of felt like they weren't being heard by their elected officials. This was back in April of 2024. It's Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for those interested in doing some more homework.
One thing I wanted to point out when we were talking about, these issues with these bonds and the movement of money is, the state legislature, sometime back passed, a 3% cap on growth on county government, on existing tax base, right? That cap, all the right intentions in the world, right? But the effect it has is it cause, in order for them to keep spending more money, is to squeeze things into bonds, right? So that they're spread out over time, so that that it's only the debt service going against your your budget, not the actual expenditures, and circumventing the thing. And recently in Fort Bend County, there was discussion about a hospital district. It's the same kind of thing, right? It's a mechanism to bring in more revenue to get around the caps. So, while these caps were a great idea, they cause, and it also causes these entities, cities and the county, to make sure their tax rate is just right under that. They're not going to leave any money on it. If they could go lower, they're not going to go lower, because once they leave that on the table, they can't get it back the next year or the next year or the next year. And they, it's presented as, well, we're being prudent because we don't know what's going to happen next year or the next year after that. And if we leave that money on the table, it's not the right thing to do for the citizens. But on the flip side, we shouldn't be having money that's not put to work for the citizens, right? I mean, we shouldn't be collecting it for the long term, right? It's not for having a savings account, right? It's, the money's supposed to be collected to put to work for the citizens.
Okay, so there's certain caps that they can't go over, and so to get around those caps, they introduce a whole nother project item. Is that how I understand this?
Well, by paying for it with a bond rather than paying cash, right? You're spreading that out and keeping that.
So they could have paid for this stuff,
right,
with their everyday operating budget.
Right.
But if they do that, then they can't put a bond issue up for. And it's okay.
The full amount goes against the cap versus the goes into the budget, which affects the cap, and then so then if you spread it out over time, it helps keep under the cap, right?
So. Lana, do you know any of these things that are happening in Harris County? Is certain? I apologize. I'm more versant on Fort Bend County issues, but what about Harris County? Do they have similar strategies to tax the citizen and overgrow the county government?
Oh, I'm pretty sure there is. I mean, the government, our government itself, we see it from the top all the way down, trickling down. And but this, if we know that we have, you just said that they had the money to pay for whatever that project was, and they lacked to go and pay for it. I mean, we're just enslaving ourselves. Yeah. It's crazy. I don't understand that. I mean, if you have the money to pay for it, why are we putting ourselves in debt year in and year out? I mean, that has really got to stop.
And the effect of ARPA was tremendous on the county, right? All this money comes in. We have all this surplus of money. We're giving money away to different groups. We're using it for revenue replacement within the county. We're hiring people. And then all of a sudden it comes to an end, and you're still, they never get rid of people, right? It's, you have all these positions that are now coming on to our, our general fund costs, right? So, the thought process, how many epidemiologists do we need on county staff, right? Look at all the hospitals you can see just from where we are here, I mean, we have hospitals everywhere. We have medical capability everywhere. Why are we saying government can do it better, right, when we know it can't?
So there was one line item on the Fort Bend County bond that just passed, and $11 million dedicated to a gymnasium. And as I understand it, they had the gymnasium. I heard, I don't know if this is true, that they were already actually had a contract on that gymnasium before the bond passed. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there at the same time. We just had a new Lifetime Fitness built in Fort Bend County, a second one.
Well, yeah,
and these Lifetime Fitness, I don't know, they're probably around $11 million. I don't know how much they are. Yeah. So why would we need our government to go build a gym for us?
Yeah, and we're, at the same time, which I love the YMCA. They do great things for us. We funded the YMCA to rebuild the YMCA in Richmond, part sponsor of that, which I think is a great organization, makes resources available to people that need resources. But a few miles away, we buy this defunct gym that's on the tax rolls for, I think it was, don't quote me, but it was significantly less than we paid for it, okay? But they were paying taxes, right? And now we collect no taxes from that building, right? Because the county owns it. And we're spending money to renovate it in the bond. So where does that make sense? And if you look at the area where it is, I could understand if it was in the middle of a community of need, right, where there's disadvantaged, that don't have access to resources, and we want to try to, keep them out of trouble and develop, put programs in place to help these kids as they're growing up. But it's, surrounded by affluent neighborhoods that, could afford to go to the private place or join the YMCA, or if they can't, get subsidy to join the YMCA. I these things just, boggle my mind that we are getting involved in so many things. It just seems to be a grab to have more projects, more contracts, more, dollars to let, and goes back to, the bigger that pot is of contracts, the bigger the contributions are to those people that are making those decisions,
So I believe I read, and it's been some time, that the greatest valuation that gymnasium had was $3 million. I don't know, but it was considerably lower than the 11.
I think it was more than that. I had 8 in my head.
Okay.
We paid 11 or something. Yeah. But yeah.
Who owned the gym? It's my first question is, who owned the gym? Who was the realtor who made the commission on the gym?
Yeah. Who are we rescuing?
Who's connected here?
Who are we intervening and rescuing? That would be my question.
Yeah.
One
of the things I think is there needs to be audits. There needs to be an audit, and the audit needs to go beyond county expenditures down one more length to the contractors that contract with the county. Because and I mean legitimate audits, not friends and family audits. And it needs to go back 10 years on all land purchases done by the county, and then see who owns all of the adjoining areas, and if they're related to any county commissioners.
And where we create a TERS, and where we're giving tax abatements, and who around that gets the gains from those things. I mean, that's key. I mean, I think that's a big game, a big business that occurs. And I grew up in Louisiana. And, there was a lot of corruption in Louisiana, but it was corruption. I mean, we just have kind of like a legalized system that allows and I really feel bad for the players in the, in the engineering and construction world and all that feel like they have to, play in this game, to get opportunities, right? I mean, it's really not fair. And I understand that it's mainly the Houston area, right? That throughout the rest of the state, these big contributions do not occur, right, to county commissioners and other elected officials. So, it's something that has grown in this area, and I think it's a very negative thing for us all that, it's, even if it's not illegal, it's, which it's not, it's definitely gives the perception of undue influence,
Nicholas, how do you see it? Do you see this debt-based game as a scheme to sort of profit the few that are connected and enslave the rest of us? Tell me how you see it.
So I found that the county commissioners at some point felt pressure to have public information sessions. I think they had maybe around 10 sessions in the fall of 2023 They really only had a 15-minute Q&A there. It wasn't a town hall meeting where you had an hour to ask questions and kind of exchange ideas with your elected county commissioners. And during those meetings, they happily shared a laundry list of projects that they wanted to have the voters take a look at. And when I started asking questions to the county commissioners, it really blew my mind about what they were telling the readers. If you looked at the asterisks and the things, and Chris, I'd be happy to illustrate a project if we have enough time. But,
yeah, we do.
So what I found from talking with the county commissioners is that when you were dealing with this $1 billion bond project, the bond election doesn't really cover 100% of a cost of a specific project. And the county commissioners are assuming that the stars are really going to align for two things to happen after the election that took place on November 7th of 23. It had to do with the local government entities being willing and able to pay the unfunded costs or any cost overruns for the project. And if the local entities were not willing or able to pay those unfunded costs, there was going to be a future bond election that was going to be approved for the voters. Now, I know that's a mouthful, so we'll just using an example, and I shared this on social media too, is that you had a project number 23212, which was the Sienna Parkway and Precinct 2. So when you look at that, it's described as being in Missouri City. The project cost in total was about $31 million, and the recommended bond amount was $6.2 million. And in layman's terms, when you look at the asterisk and looked at what they were describing, the description said that the $6.3 million of that $31 million only covered 50%, just half of the design, right-of-way, and utilities for that project. So they were assuming that Missouri city government was going to cover the other 50% of the planning, and that the city was going to be able to fund the rest of the 18-some million related to that as part of the construction project. So best I could tell, there was no healthy debate taking place with saying we want the bondholders to approve $6 million for this project. We recognize there's a total cost of $31 million, but where is that different or that delta going to come from? And are we willing and able or prioritizing that as a project that we really want over other projects locally in our city?
That's a very important aspect of all. I mean, if you look in there, how many things are just seed money, right, that has to be matched by other entities, or is just, the study phase that's going to lead on to something that needs to be in another bond in the future, right? And, I'd rather see if you've got, $200 million in projects that potentially last over, over 8 years, 10 years or whatever, then why don't we have complete projects in there, at least with estimates? And the problem is with that large of a thing, as you go out in time, the cost changes, the scope is going to change, all that's going to change. And that's why we have a chunk of that money in there is to finish off projects from previous bonds, because they ran out of money, right? Because of inflation, cost overruns, and scope change that, because the last bond was just too big, right? And it's, we just keep doing this vicious circle of creating this problem for ourselves where we're going to keep needing more and more money to finish what we think we voted for, right?
He mentioned that they did those information sessions, and what they do these information sessions. Again, they talk about all the Christmas presents we're going to get, talk about everything in glowing terms, and then when it comes for the hard critique, they have a limited time for question and answers. And a lot of times what I've noticed is that it seems to me that they have the spots already picked for the people that will ask the questions. Mm-hmm. There was one time I showed up at County Commissioner's Court and I had some fairly, I had some points to make, and they turned off my mic. They turned off my mic. So they're not ready for your critique. They don't want it. They want the citizen to sit in their chair. Do not show up to County Commissioner's Court. Do not put these people on the hot seat. By the way, if you do it, if you actually go and start questioning these people and engaging with them, it is really, it's great. It's fun, and it needs to be done. But my point being, getting back to those information sessions, they had that all planned out and prepared. So then they could say, oh, we went to the community and asked the questions, right?
Right, and you could call them more accurately indoctrination sessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to lay out what, they think people will bite on to, while not saying you need to go vote for this, but if they present something for everybody, Christmas presents, it's just like with all the, the COVID money and the ARPA money, right? Our county judge ran around playing like he was Santa Claus, going to different organizations. Oh, we're going to pay to help you build this building, or we're going to pay to do this, or we're going to do. I mean, when Santa Claus visits you and has presents, of course you're going to vote for him, right? And it's kind of the way the game is currently played.
Go ahead, Lana. What's up?
So I do, I see that there needs to be a lot more accountability for our government officials. And, voting is coming up soon. I'm happy for the show. I'm happy we're talking about this. This is where we make changes. When the people are educated and informed, we go out and we make really good choices. We vote in the right people. So I want to thank you for, talking on this issue, because now people are listening and they're being educated. So when that time comes for that person to come up to, when we're coming up for a re-election, hey, if they're not doing good for the community, get them out.
Right. Yep. And I think that the point was effectively made. We are in a economy that is pressing and weighing on the people. Go look at our homelessness, And by the way, every argument I make for homelessness, I am not saying that the government should propose another project to take care of that. No. My solution is quit building sports stadiums, quit building concert hall arenas, quit building gymnasiums. Let's scale back the government, bring it back down to size. I think my opening intro where I talked about, since the beginning of time, there's been men who've stood up against the money lenders. And I think that this conversation here has sort of brought it out into full scope. The number of things that Bill and Nicholas and Lana have articulated, all of these tactics and schemes, the way that they can use lending to benefit the few at the top and then oppress the rest of us. I think that it's considerable. We'll go ahead and finish it out, Bill. You got any final comments?
I was just saying, yeah. I mean, it's a game of what money can we get access to, what's the total there? Then let's go figure out how we want to spend it, right? Instead of what needs to be done. What needs to be done to service the citizens? What have we been doing that no longer needs to be done that we can reduce and shrink? In business, you're always analyzing everything you do to become more efficient, so you can service your customers better and be more competitive against your competitors. When you have a captive audience, if you use as an example, during COVID when we had, the county judge shutting down businesses, right? Well, those businesses have to go out and they're laying off people. Those people are suffering or whatever. The county's still collecting your taxes, right? There's no impact to how the county operates because it's based on property tax. And if there was going to be some impact, it'd be delayed significantly over years. And as long as they, those who control can make decisions that don't benefit the citizens but benefit themselves, we have to find ways to hold them accountable, as you said. That's the key thing. Is we need to not be afraid. I mean, some people think I'm crazy for saying the things I've probably said on this show. It's like, people are going to come after you, for stating this stuff. But it's how I feel, and I believe, integrity, doing what's right comes above everything else.
Yeah, but I think that the argument that will be used against you is if you're out there saying these things, how are you going to lead a campaign for re-election when it is the recipients of these contracts that are going to be donating to campaigns? How will you counter that?
I mean, as far as
for example, let's say you ran for county commissioner. Mm-hmm. Do you think that all these contracting firms that are making money off the government, they're not going to send any donations your way?
Actually, I think if they truly believe the game was changing, they would be happy. They would be happy not to have to be walking this line, what's appropriate. Oh, this guy running against an incumbent, he's got a good chance to win. Do I contribute to his campaign, or is that going to hurt me if the incumbent does win? And I personally think if they thought the game was changing, they would be happy. Everybody I know, in that sector, doesn't like having to do what has to be done. So I think it would be a breath of fresh air for them. Now, how do you do that and make that happen? You can't do it as one person. So we need to find ways to improve our election finance on the state level and try to limit how these things occur.
That's a great way to close out this hour. So I do appreciate it. Bill Rickert, County Treasurer, appreciate you having you on. Lana Centonze, running for, tell us again what office you're running for.
Congressional District 18. I'm running against Sylvester Turner.
Excellent, very good. And Nicholas calling in, Missouri City resident, right, Nicholas? Is that where you're from?
I am, yes.
Excellent, very good, man. Glad to have you on the show. Appreciate everybody. This is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. See you next week, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Have a good day.